Assalamu alaikum everyone. I hope you are doing well and taking good care of yourselves. This is your instructor Ali Faruqi and you're watching Science with Ali. So today we're going to be jumping into a brand new topic called chemical reactions. Now this is a very big chapter. So the first two subtopics that we're going to be studying in this chapter is energy changes and rate of reactions. So let's just start right away. Now chemistry is basically the study of chemical reactions, right? We know that, obviously. Now, what are chemical reactions further divided into? What two categories of chemical reactions exist? So, one category is called exothermic, and the second category is called endothermic, right? So either a chemical reaction would be exothermic or it would either be endothermic. Okay? Now, the literal meaning of thermic basically means energy, right? And thermic, as you can guess, comes from the word thermal. The heat they're talking about is called thermal. So this basically means thermic is another version of thermal, right? So you're basically just talking about heat. Now, what does endothermic and exothermic mean? Exo stands for exit and endo stands for enter. Therefore, you can say that in an exothermic reaction, the energy exits a reaction, and in an endothermic reaction, the energy enters a reaction. So let's just pen this down. Okay, so let's write down exothermic over here and endothermic over here, right? So what does exothermic mean? We talked about a reaction in which energy exits a reaction. So we're just going to go ahead and tell it that energy is given out. Energy is given out. In an endothermic reaction, what were we discussed? We discussed that a reaction in which energy is absorbed. All right. Now, in order for you to understand this more clearly, I will be going to give you an example. So, when you're near a stove, there's food cooking in your kitchen. So, when you come near the stove, what do you feel? You feel heat, right? So, that heat is the energy that is released when something burns. Like, for example, in your stove, methane gas, you call it gas, right? Natural gas is burning, so it's burning and it's giving out energy in the form of heat. So you can call that an exothermic reaction because you feel hot when you come near the stove, so energy is given out as a result. So we call that an exothermic reaction. Now, as for an endothermic reaction example, we can have a look at photosynthesis. So, an example of is photosynthesis for endothermic reactions, right? So, what is photosynthesis? It is basically a process plants do during the day to convert carbon dioxide and water into glucose and oxygen, right? So, have a look at it one more time. Plants do it during the day. Why? Because they need light energy to enable that process to start. Why do you think photosynthesis does not happen at night? Because there's no light. So, in order to start the reaction, in order for photosynthesis to take place, you need light energy. And what does this mean indirectly? That energy is absorbed. So, you can say that it is an endothermic reaction. Okay. Now, I will clarify one thing, that there is no reaction that exists which there is no energy change involved. For example, there's always an energy change in the reaction. It is either an exothermic or an endothermic reaction. So let's just jot this down. There is no reaction that exists in which there is no energy change involved. All right, so let's just keep it red because this is a thing to remember. A lot of students make a mistake in the exam thinking that a reaction is not an exothermic, not even endothermic. So this is a point to remember. Okay, let's just highlight this over here. Right, so now when we talk about exothermic and endothermic reactions, there's always going to be a temperature curve involved. All right, temperature curves. Okay, now what is this all about? What are temperature curves? So when we talk about temperature, obviously in an exothermic reaction, as you can see over here, the energy is always given out. So as a result, the surrounding temperature increases, right? So if we jot this down as well, surrounding temperature increases, we can say that energy is always given out. As we discussed earlier about the stove example, we said that when you go near the stove, you feel the heat. So as you come nearer and nearer to the stove, you will feel that the temperature is getting hotter and hotter. As a result, it is an exothermic reaction. Okay, temperature increases. If I draw a beaker for more clarity, if I draw a beaker in this, and if I go ahead and make arrows indicating that this is the heat and the heat is given out. Okay, now vice versa, as an endothermic reaction takes place, the surrounding temperature decreases due to the fact that the energy is being absorbed from the surrounding, so the temperature decreases. If I draw a beaker over here as well, we can say that the arrows are coming in, which means that energy is being absorbed and hence the surrounding temperature is decreasing. So this can very much be plotted on a graph as well, hence the temperature curves that we're studying. It is a graph indirectly. So let's just go ahead and draw the graph. It's very simple. Go ahead and draw two separate graphs for exothermic and for endothermic. Let's just go ahead and label them. Time in minutes, as well as temperature on the y-axis in degrees Celsius, of course, temperature and degrees Celsius. Right, now before we plot the graphs, there is a general thing that you guys need to know, is that there's a thing called room temperature, right? So for reference, we will make a line in both the reactions for room temperature. Okay, now if you pick up or touch any object in your room, it will be the same temperature as the whole room, because that's what room temperature is, unless the object is from a stove or a fridge. If it's a hot teacup or it's a cold glass of water, it will be cold and it will be hot respectively. Now if we start the reaction, we will see this is we are talking about the exothermic reaction, by the way. So if we start this reaction, obviously the surrounding temperature will start to increase. Okay, now let's just say that my reaction stopped at this point called X. Okay, so point X is the point where my reaction has stopped. The reactants are all finished and the products have been formed, and now there is just not enough reaction, that now the whole reaction is complete. Now what will happen is that the temperature is going to decrease back to room temperature because the reaction is finished. Now, why did the temperature fall back to room temperature even after the temperature increased? Why? Because obviously a glass of water can't stay cold forever, right? It can't stay warm forever, cold forever. A hot teacup can't stay warm forever. It eventually has to come down to room temperature because it's going to lose all of its energy into the surroundings. I mean, it will increase the surrounding temperature for a bit. If you can see here, the surrounding temperature is increasing in the initially, but now when the reaction is finished in the second stage, it will fall back to room temperature because there's not enough energy present in the object. The reaction ended at X, now it's going to fall back to room temperature. In the same way, if we talk about endothermic reaction, because the surrounding temperature decreases, we will say that initially the room temperature, it falls and the reaction stops somewhere here at X as well. So eventually it will come back to room temperature because a glass of water can't stay cold forever, and it's going to just gain the energy from the surroundings. Understood? So what have we recapped over here? We have done that in an exothermic reaction, the surrounding temperature increases, and in an endothermic reaction, the surrounding temperature decreases. Okay. Then we made a few beakers, and then we made the temperature curves, in which we discussed how initially in an exothermic reaction, the temperature increases from the room temperature, but when the reaction stops, it will eventually fall back to room temperature. And in an endothermic reaction, the temperature will decrease from room temperature and it will then increase back up to room temperature because the reaction has been taken place. Okay, now next up we need to learn a few examples that are always endothermic and exothermic. So let's just go ahead and start off with types of exothermic reactions. All right. Now, how this is going to work is there are always some reactions that are always exothermic. So a few examples of these types is number one, which is combustion. Now, what actually is combustion? Burning of a substance in presence of oxygen. So it will always going to be an exothermic reaction as we discussed earlier. Okay, so let's just write it down. Now, this specific example is going to be linking back to what I said earlier about the stove example. I hope you remember in the beginning of the lesson I told that when you come near the stove, you feel the heat of the stove. So what is actually burning inside the stove that actually generates that heat energy? It's actually this example, this reaction is taking place in the stove, right? So don't worry about balancing here as well because we just need to look at the reaction. Now this is generally the products that I get, but wait, there's more. What is there to add? It is energy. Now we generally don't write energy as a separate term in this chemical reaction, but I'm just writing for you to understand that in this reaction heat energy is produced. It is actually not on the product side, so it is produced. Now when you burn CH4, this is methane. Okay, so when you burn methane and oxygen, you're going to be getting carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Now for energy, you need a source, a fuel. For example, you can take coal in cruise ships and various vehicles as well, in factories as well. So burning is done of that source, and we use the energy that is provided by that source to generate what we want. For example, in a car you use fuel, so it is not the fuel that provides you the energy, it is the burning of the fuel that provides you with energy, and that energy is used to make the car actually go forward, right? So this is one of the examples of combustion and in which energy is produced. It is an exothermic reaction as it is on the product side. The second example that we have for exothermic reactions, types of exothermic reactions, is respiration. So it is basically also a type of combustion, you can say, but it is a separate reaction. So we're going to be studying this separately. It is a type of combustion. Don't mix this up with combustion, but it's very similar to each other. Now, in a similar way, our body consumes whatever we eat it gets converted into glucose. You will study this in biology. So what happens is that a glucose molecule, one glucose molecule, gets burned in oxygen as well by our body to provide us with carbon dioxide, water, and also energy over here as well. So it is actually this energy that actually keeps us alive. Like I can move my hands and feet as well. So this is the energy that's keeping them moving. In a similar way, glucose is being burned by our body in oxygen as a fuel to provide us energy, and it is this energy that keeps us alive. So burning of food in a living organism to provide energy for survival is called respiration, and it is also an exothermic reaction. So but there's one more thing, that you need to learn this equation, because this equation is going to be proving vital in this topic. So just learn it ahead, as the examiner in the past papers, they do ask this question, like state the combustion of glucose, state the equation for respiration. So this is the equation with the correct balancing as well, right? So I have added them by myself, but you need to know how to balance this. Okay, so let's now move on to the third reaction, which is called neutralization reaction. It is when an acid and alkali react together to produce salt and water. When an acid and alkali react to produce salt and water. Now the general equation that we have for this is 1 H plus ion reacts with 1 OH minus ion to give us H2O. Now this, I have written a simpler version of the whole reaction, but when you study acids, bases and salts, you will be able to get a better understanding of what neutralization reaction is, how it works. But I'm just going to be solving one example to make this clear over here. HCl plus sodium hydroxide, sodium chloride, and water. So whenever an acid and an alkali react to produce salt and water, it is called a neutralization reaction, and energy is produced as a result. So whenever you get the time in the lab, you just go ahead and mix up an acid and an alkali, and if you place a thermometer in the beaker of the reaction, you will notice the temperature going up. So it's going to be an exothermic reaction, because it is on the product side as well, and it is producing energy and increasing the surrounding temperature as a result. Okay, so I hope that's clear. Now let's move on to different types of endothermic reactions. These are all the reactions that are always endothermic. All right. So the first reaction that we have is photosynthesis, like we discussed earlier in this lesson. So what is photosynthesis? It is basically carbon dioxide and water react to produce, in the presence of light, glucose and oxygen. So let's write down the equation. 6CO2 plus 6H2O provides us with 1 glucose molecule and water. Now there is light involved in this, so let's just go ahead and label light. Now I know chlorophyll is also present over here in this part of the equation, but this is chemistry, not biology, so just need to keep the both subjects aside. So you need light in order to carry out this reaction, hence it is an endothermic reaction. Now if you notice, this equation is completely opposite to the respiration equation that we solved above. You have carbon dioxide and water on the product side plus energy on the product side, and the glucose and oxygen molecule on the reactant side. But over here you have glucose and oxygen as a product and carbon dioxide and water as a reactant. So it's basically opposite reaction of what's happening. Here glucose is being made, and there glucose is being burned to provide energy. So what photosynthesis is, it is basically a source of food for all organisms. This is what photosynthesis does. It is a reaction that is happening in plants. It also produces oxygen, enables us to live. And the last point that we have is it removes carbon dioxide from the environment. Hence, it reduces global warming. So that's why we go ahead and push why we should plant more trees and all. This is the real reason. Okay, well, that's clear. Now, the second example that we have is decomposition. Now, what is decomposition? It is a breakdown of a compound into simpler compounds or elements. Now, what do you actually mean by this definition in particular? To understand this, we're going to be doing an equation in which we break down a compound. Ammonia is broken down into nitrogen and hydrogen. This is the equation of Haber's process. You will study this in reversible reactions. So the point is that if any compound is broken down, it will always require energy for that and be endothermic. It is impossible for a compound to break down and for a reaction to not be endothermic, because whenever a compound is broken, it will always require heat, and as a result, it will always be an endothermic reaction, right? As you can see, breakdown of a compound into simpler compounds or elements, that's decomposition. So this is a more complex compound. It contains nitrogen and hydrogen in a compound, right? But when it is heated, it breaks down into nitrogen and hydrogen, simpler compounds or elements. The ammonia, which is NH3 combined, breaks down into nitrogen and hydrogen into its constituent elements respectively. Let's do another example. The example that we have is calcium carbonate. If we add heat, we get calcium oxide and carbon dioxide if we provide heat to this, right? So one compound breaks, two simpler compounds are forming, right? So this is called a decomposition reaction. So this ends part 1 of our energy changes / rate of reaction chemical reactions topic. If you have any questions regarding this lesson, feel free to drop it down in the comment section below, and I'll make sure to respond to every single comment that gets posted. And take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video.